Jim Marshall's 41 years old, and Jim Marshall has a gray beard. And I'm lined up thinking that's Jim Marshall. He's 41 years old. They hike the ball. Jim Marshall runs right over me and makes the tackle. We're sitting in a meeting. We're sitting in a meeting on Monday. And coach goes, Coffman, what the hell are you thinking here? I didn't want to say, I'm thinking that's Jim Marshall. He's 41 years old. He's got a gray beard.
Welcome to Tales from the Tundra, a weekly show that captures one team's history told through the eyes of the fan. My name is Ben, and on today's episode, I got a special one for you. We are sitting down with none other than former tight end, Packers Hall of Famer, Paul Coffman. This was such a fun episode, and I know you're going to enjoy it as much as I did. During this conversation, we talk about Paul's upbringing, his time and journey to getting into the NFL, life after football, and so much more. I cannot wait for you to listen to this one. There are so many fun stories and so many things that I think you're going to enjoy as a listener. This is episode 5 of Tales from the Tundra with Paul Coffman. Enjoy. Making the NFL is an extremely difficult thing to do. That obviously goes without saying. It's even more difficult, I think, when you're going to a smaller high school and even playing in an underperforming college. That is Paul's path to the NFL. Before we talk about Paul in the NFL, we want to talk about his roots, where things started for Paul.
So I actually pretty much lived with my grandma and grandpa for about the first 6 years. My mom and dad were divorced when I was less than 1 year old, and my mom worked at McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis, and I was basically staying with my grandma and grandpa, and would see her on weekends. And then she remarried a man by the name of Robert Coffman, who adopted me, and we moved from basically the inner city of St. Louis to a town in western Kansas, about 600 people, and it's Chase, Kansas. And
Wow.
it basically, my stepdad, Robert Coffman, and moving to Chase, Kansas probably saved my life. I really, he was, he was a school teacher. He was a farmer. I had the best of hard work and education. I was in a small town where I could, basically come home when the street lights came on. And, we played sandlot baseball and football. There were a few people that had really nice lawns in Chase, Kansas. And so we would play football on those lawns until they till they ran us off. And then we'd usually end up in some dirt field somewhere, tackling each other. And, but it was a great place to grow up, and, hunting, fishing, all the sports, football, basketball, baseball. And I tell people that basically I fouled out of about every game in football or in basketball, and I couldn't hit a curveball. So football was kind of where I gravitated to. And, again, small town, Friday night lights, people would park their cars like by the end zones. And if you scored a touchdown, they'd start honking their horns. And, it was really, really a great place to grow up.
That's fantastic. And now your son's name is Chase as well. Is that where you got the inspiration for his
Yeah,
name?
my senior year, I got uh, voted or nominated to play in the Kansas Shriners All-Star football game. And it was East against West. Well, East had Kansas City, Topeka, Salina. We had Wichita, and a bunch of small towns. And I was from the smallest town, and the coach couldn't ever remember my name, but he remembered I was from Chase. He called me Chase, and I thought, you know what? If I ever have a son, I'm going to name him Chase. So that's where he got his name.
That is fantastic. And were you a fan of pro football growing up then, or was it something you were just too busy played all the other sports to kind of pay attention to the pro football?
No, again, I loved watching, the Chiefs in the '60s, and kind of gravitated toward the Dallas Cowboys. Back when you only got three channels on your TV.
Sure.
The AFC, we would get the Chiefs, and the NFC, we'd get the Cowboys. And I my my dream was to be like Calvin Hill, number 35 of the Dallas Cowboys. He was a running back, and I played running back in high school, and so I just hoped that someday I could be like Calvin Hill. And I actually kind of liked the Vikings back then, Joe Cap, and the Purple People Eaters with Jim Marshall and Alan Page, Gary Larson, and that whole group up there. And we didn't get many Packer games growing up, so I can't say that I grew up a Packer fan.
So then you go off to Kansas State for college, correct?
Right.
And I had read. Go ahead.
I didn't get a scholarship. I had a scholarship offer from Fort Hays State, Division II school out in Western Kansas, and Coffeyville Junior College. And I actually went on a recruiting trip to Kansas State. There was a farmer oil man in our town that gave money to K-State, and his family and kids all went to Kansas State. And I think he probably made a call up there and said, "Hey, at least bring me up and give me a weekend to recruit." Well, they had a coach at the time by the name of Vince Gibson, who had a real strong Southern accent. And, my whole weekend was great. Actually, one of the guys that was already on the team, a year older than me, got a scholarship there. And I played against him in high school. His name was Perry Veers from a small town called Little River, Kansas. And I thought, you know what, if he can make it up there and get a scholarship, I can make it up there. And he showed me around that weekend. We had a big time, of course, coming from a small town and all of a sudden being in the college atmosphere is just overwhelming. And Coach Gibson, I went into his office, actually went to his house the last day, and he had purple carpet on the floor. He had a purple wildcat in the bottom of his swimming pool, and it's pretty impressive. And he said, "Paul Coffman," he said, "you're going to be a fine, fine ball player here at Kansas State University." He said, "But Paul, they did one thing wrong." He said, "I done give away all my scholarships." I said, "Well, Coach Gibson," I said, Coffeyville Junior College wants me, and I'll go down there. I'll get a couple years of experience and, some size, and then I'll come up here." He said, "No, no, no, no." He said, "We'll run off some boys at two-a-days." He said, "You'll get yourself a scholarship in no time." He said, "We'll find you a place in the dormitory." He said, "You hang around them boys on scholarship. They'll pick up your books for you. All you have to do is pay your tuition." So basically, that's I was too naive to realize what he meant by "we're going to run off some boys during two-a-days." But basically, the walk-ons are the dummies. I mean, you're running KU's plays, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Missouri, the Colorado, the teams we played in the Big Eight back then. And so I had to, I started out at running back. Then I moved to outside linebacker. Then they had some tight ends get hurt. I think somebody quit, and they just needed some bodies at tight ends. And so that's how I got moved to tight end. But going back to Chase, Kansas, when I was, in seventh grade, I hurt my elbow. And when you grow up in a town of 500 people, your doctor is also your veterinarian. So to take calcium deposits out of my elbow, they opened it up here and opened it up here.
Wow.
This arm only straightens this far and only bends this far.
Wow.
Well, then my left elbow, same thing happened to it, but they just decided to open it up here. It only straightens this far and only bends that far. So, to,
Wow.
think, well, why didn't you get a scholarship? I think people were kind of afraid. I remember the doctor said, well, you'll be fine as long as you don't play football. And I said, oh, doc, man, I got to play football. So they gave me a brace that was made out of like what they make prosthesis out of, and it had Velcro straps on it, and it kind of held my arm here, so I could hit and grab. I could hold a football playing running back. So I had some limitations, I guess you would say, going into college.
Wow. And those that extension's something that you dealt with throughout your entire career, which is just blowing my mind. I never knew that about you.
Yeah, yeah,
So you mentioned at Kansas State that you kind of got thrown into tight end because they needed the body in that position.
right.
And I had
Yeah.
read that it was something similar as how you got your look by Green Bay, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, at Kansas State, if I was successful running the other team's plays, then the defensive player got his butt chewed, and we had to run a play again. And this time he knew it was coming. So anyway, um, I there's times I thought about quitting just because I was getting the crap beat out of me every day in practice. But I knew if I quit, I took away the thing I loved, and there was always tomorrow. I get to
Mhm.
go to practice. I get to go to practice tomorrow. Well, when I played at Kansas State, we were arguably the worst college football program in the United States. We won one game my junior year and one game my senior year.
Wow.
My senior year, we beat Wichita State, that had just recovered. I don't know if you know this, that they had a plane wreck and lost basically their entire football team. And this was in the late 60s. And they had just kind of rebuilt the program. And then when we beat them, my senior year, they dropped the program for good because they figured if they couldn't beat Kansas State, then they didn't really need a football program.
Wow.
But I had an opportunity to play and be a starter, and we had one guy on our team that was deemed an NFL quality player, and he was a linebacker by the name of Gary Spaney that just so happened to be my roommate. And back in the day, they didn't have the NFL Combine,
Mhm.
so coaches would come to the different universities to work out players, and I would come along with Gary and say, hey, we're roommates, we're workout partners. You're only working out one guy. Take a look at me too. So these linebacker coaches would be working me out. And I remember the day that Green Bay came, Coach John Meyer, it was raining. So we went in the field house, and they had a 20 track around the basketball court. And so we could run our 40. Then we got on the basketball court, and Gary would do his linebacker drops and, turn his hips and everything. And then Coach John Meyer would say, well, just run 10 yards and kind of an out route for me. So I'd run an out route. And of course, he's a linebacker coach. He couldn't throw the ball. It would be fluttering in the air. And I remember, diving into the bleachers to try to catch some of his passes. And the story that I got was they're sitting in a meeting and they're getting ready for mini camp. And Coach Bart Starr is looking at the roster and says, you mean to tell me we only got 2 tight ends coming to mini camp? Said, we're going to kill our starter, Rich McGeorge. Of course, back then, there were no off-season programs. Most of the guys had jobs in the off-season.
Mhm.
And so, Coach Starr said, did any of you guys work out any tight ends? John Meyer raises his hand and said, well, I worked out this kid at Kansas State, said he won't make the team, but he won't embarrass us. So I loaded. They called me and offered me a $1,000 signing bonus and a contract of 24,000 the first year and 30 the second. Well,
Wow.
Denver had also worked me out, and they wanted to sign me as a linebacker. And they had Randy Gradishire, Bo Swinson, Thomas Jackson, all pro guys. And I said, well, what do you want to sign me for? I said, well, we got no backups. We got, no special team players. You come, you make the team. We know you used to play linebacker, and, we'll keep you here in the off season, work with you. And, we'd love to have you. Well, they were going to offer me more money. So I called Green Bay back and I said, look, I'm going to have 2,500 to sign. And the phone went completely silent, went dead. And I'm thinking, oh crap, I've messed this up. And the guy, I think his name was Dick Corick, he said, well, we'll give you 1,500. I said, okay, real quick, because I didn't want to make you mad. And so I loaded up everything I owned into a 1967 Chevrolet and drove to Green Bay to make the team.
Wow. And for them to say that you won't make the team, but you won't embarrass them either.
Well, they didn't say that. They didn't say that to me.
To you, right.
Yeah.
But for you to not only make the team and have the career that you did, still arguably the best tight end in our franchise history, statistically anyways, in an era that defenses were allowed to play defense as well, which is... Hey, it's Ben. Sorry to jump in. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I wanted to draw a winner from last week's episode. If this is your first time watching or listening, each week we draw a winner from a listener that will win a piece of Packers memorabilia. To enter, you will find the link in the show notes or the comments below. There's a weekly giveaway link there, and you'll fill out that form. There is going to be a word of the week, which will be sprinkled somewhere throughout the episode, so keep your ears perked for that one. But let's draw this week's winner. Thank you to all who entered, and huge thank you to Nicolay Law for making these giveaways possible all year long. Let's see, this week's winner is... we have Peter. Peter lives in Denmark. You might be hearing an episode about Peter in the future. Spoiler alert. So congratulations, Peter. This week, we're not doing, usually we do the wheel to see the prize that is won. But I figured with this week's episode being all about Paul Coffman, it made sense just to give away a Paul Coffman 8x10. Super great shot. And yeah, Peter, this is yours. So thank you for the support to everyone who entered. And once again, thank you to Nicolay Law for making these giveaways possible. If you are injured, get Nicolay. Now let's get back to our episode with Paul. I was doing some reading as I was, I'm very familiar with your career and what you've brought to Green Bay, but I was doing a little bit of reading. And the one thing that stood out to me, everyone said that you would just outwork everyone. And that was your motto and mentality on everything, is you were just going to outwork everyone.
Well, again, going back to Chase, Kansas, my dad was a school teacher and a farmer. So he would get up at 5, he would go out in the field and plow till 7 or 7:30, come back, put on his coat and tie, teach biology, chemistry, and physics all day long at the high school, go back out in the field and plow or disc or plant whatever he needed to do till dark. Plus, there were a lot of oil field workers, and like the pumps need maintained. And down in the ground, there's casing, which is probably big around as a basketball. Inside the casing is tubing, about as big around as a tennis ball. And inside the tubing are metal rods that go way down in the earth, and at the bottom of these rods is a pump. So when you see these oil wells going up and down and up and down, they're pumping the oil back up that tubing and then out to a holding tank or to some other area. And occasionally the pump would go bad, occasionally the rods would break or the tubing would leak. So we had people that repaired that stuff. And I mean, if the pump wasn't working, the guy that owned the pump wasn't making any money.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't matter if, right now here in Kansas City, we're having single digit, weather, which, in Wisconsin, I'm sure it might even be colder than that. But, you know, they would be out there repairing those pumps in this kind of weather. Or occasionally in Western Kansas, it would be 110 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And, the same way with the farmers, it didn't matter, if the, storm was coming in and the wheat harvest was right in the middle, you had to get the wheat out of the field, or hail or hard rain would knock the heads off, and, you wouldn't have the harvest. So, I mean, I saw people doing whatever it took to basically survive and make money. And, it was just kind of, ingrained in people in our hometown that you worked till the job was done. It didn't matter if it was -5 or if it was 105. You did what you needed to do to get the job done. And that was just, what I was used to. And so I knew I wasn't that big. Actually, when I got to Green Bay, I weighed 217 pounds. During 2-a-days, I lost down to 212. So I went in the weight room. I got a 5-pound weight and I stuck it in my jock, and I'd put on some double X large shorts. So when I weighed in and out, that I would be back up to 217. Because for some reason in my mind, I thought if I get under 215 pounds, they're going to cut me. You can't play tight end in the NFL at 210 or 12 pounds. And, but, I spent a lot of time in the weight room. I ran track in high school. I was a quarter miler, which is a pretty grueling race. I mean, you just got to run as fast as you can for that whole quarter, and you come down that home stretch, and man, you're tightening up. And I could always run. I mean, I was a 4.7 guy, but I knew I could run 4.7 all day.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to win every sprint after practice. And, again, hard work, education. I knew my mom would always say, I don't want to teach kids things. I want to teach them how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I want to teach them how to learn something and apply it to a trade or their job. And so memorization was always big in our house. When every time we would take a trip to Colorado or Yellowstone Park, or wherever we went in the summer, it was like an oral test for me sitting in the back seat, and so I knew I could learn my plays and not make any mental mistakes. I knew I could win the sprints after practice. I knew I could hustle downfield if James Lofton was catching a pass, deep down, I could go down and block for him. So I just tried to apply the things that I grew up with to my football career. And, Bart Starr was the type of coach that he appreciated those things.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't put up with mental mistakes. If you don't know what you're doing on the play, on offense, one guy screws up and the play's busted.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a defensive player, one guy can make an outstanding play and stop the offense,
Right.
So,
right.
yeah. So, I was in the right place at the right time. Lynn Dickey was a quarterback at Kansas State. We didn't play together, but I knew people who knew Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
So I would sit by Lynn in the meetings, and I could learn what I did on the play, but then he would explain to me why I was doing it, what the concept of the passing routes were, what he was reading as a quarterback, what the defenses were trying to do to stop us. Just little nuances that I wouldn't have figured out by myself unless I sat by him in the meetings. And he would explain to me what the defenses were trying to do to stop us, where the holes were, that he was reading outside in, inside out, whether, I was going to be a security valve, or whether I was the main receiver on the play. So, My first year up there, Rich McGeorge was the starter, and I didn't catch a pass. Really, I just played two tight end situations and special teams. And Lynn had actually broken both bones in his lower leg in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
And a guy by the name of David Whitehurst was the quarterback. And we became friends. We were both young, single, and then that second year, 1979, we became roommates. Well, David, when he would get in trouble, he knew, okay, James is deep, John Jefferson's, 12 yards down the field, but Paul's hooked up at 8 yards right over the middle. So I was David's security blanket. And when he would get in trouble or confused, he would look for me. And that second year, I caught 56 passes, which at the time was a record for a tight end in Green Bay. And again, just thank God I was in the right place at the right time with David Whitehurst, Lynn Dickey, Bart Starr, and then Bob Snelker came in as our offensive coordinator, and he was an old tight end, so he would actually design passes, for the tight end position.
Perfect situation for you.
Oh gosh, yeah.
As you think over the first couple of years in the NFL, was there ever a moment where it was like your welcome to the NFL moment? Like you're playing with someone that you, I don't know, idolized or really thought fondly of, and kind of that starstruck moment, or just something that was kind of like a pinch me, this is very surreal, I'm in the NFL?
Well, actually, my rookie year, we were playing against the Vikings, and situation, and I look up, and Jim Marshall is lined up across from me. Jim Marshall's 41 years old, and Jim Marshall has a gray beard. And I'm lined up thinking that's Jim Marshall. He's 41 years old. They hike the ball. Jim Marshall runs right over me and makes the tackle. We're sitting in a meeting. On Monday. And coach goes, Coffman, what the hell are you thinking here? I didn't want to say, I'm thinking that's Jim Marshall. He's 41 years old. And he's got a gray beard. So, I mean, it was, and playing against the Cowboys, just growing up, and in the early 70s and, pretty much most of the 70s, they were kind of America's team, and it, just being in the NFL. I mean, it's bigger than life. You grow up in a town of 500 people, and all of a sudden you're in a stadium. Actually, when I knew that I made the team my rookie year, our opening game was in Detroit in the Silver Dome. And I remember just walking out on the field and looking up and going, wow, look at this place. This is the NFL. I kept thinking to myself, boy, you could put a lot of hay in this barn here. So.
I mean, really, to go from the Friday Night Lights with the cars in the end zones flashing their lights to the Silver Dome where you can store a lot of hay. That's a big leap for sure. When you so graciously agreed to come on here, two games came to my mind right away that I wanted to ask you about, and I apologize if you're sick of talking about these two games. But the first one that came to mind was the Monday night game, 1983, against the defending Super Bowl champion. They come into Green Bay, and you had a hell of a performance. 2 touchdowns on the grand stage. We mentioned that the Packers didn't get many primetime games then, and you made sure they remembered it with the Packers, helping the Packers beat Washington 48-47 on the highest scoring Monday night game of at the time of all time. What was that moment like, or that game like for you as a player?
Well, actually, we had James Lofton, John Jefferson, and what what we did was we went into a slot formation, meaning that, okay, James is out wide, and then John Jefferson lines up in the slot between the tackle and James Lofton, who's on the line of scrimmage. Well, I'm on the other side next to the tackle. And what they would do is they would put Darrell Green on James, and their other corner would line up right on John Jefferson, and they would bump and run those guys, and they would move Mark Murphy, the general manager, the old general manager of the Packers,
president,
basically to back them up. Well, that left me almost a whole half of the field with their strong safety, Curtis Jordan. And, again, I wasn't that fast, but I was kind of sneaky. And, if you had me one-on-one, I could shake and bake and do this and that. And, I loved watching James Lofton run routes. I loved watching film of other tight ends, Dave Casper, played for the Raiders for a long time. Jimmy Giles, who played down in Tampa, Dave Hill, that played over in Detroit. I loved watching them run routes, and I would try things in practice. And John Anderson and Mark Murphy would stay out with me after practice, and we would run routes. David Whitehurst would throw, and I'd work on, again, when defenses could play defense, one of the hardest things for a tight end was just getting off the line of scrimmage. Mm-hmm. So I would tell John Anderson, do whatever you can. Don't let me release. Grab me, trip me, push me, whatever you can do. So I would, boom, 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 the old wax on, wax off, the Karate Kid, just trying to get off the line of scrimmage. And then, then you got a strong safety waiting for you. And I would act like I'm going one way and then go the other way. And, I figured, well, if it worked against those guys, it would work against the other teams. And so I had all this room. And actually, the first half of the game, I caught 6 passes for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that was the first half. Well, then the second half, the Redskins made an adjustment, and it wasn't that wide open. But, we had Gary Ellis. We had, he could catch the ball out of the backfield. We had, 4 guys catch, well, maybe even 5. Eddie Lee, we might have had 5 guys catch over 50 passes. Wow. And, so the second half, we did other things. But, that was a Monday night game, too. So, back in the day, you knew all your peers were watching. Mm-hmm. And so that actually, all my, it was back in the day when you had a recorder by your phone at home. And, I got home and my recorder was full of all my NFL buddies, across the league calling me, going, you'll go to the Pro Bowl this year. And, sure enough, that was my first year being, elected to go to the Pro Bowl. And again, if you showed out on Monday night, you knew everybody in the NFL would be watching you. Mm-hmm. And, and actually, Jan Stenerud made a field goal with, I don't know, maybe 50 seconds left. And I'm standing by Lynn Dickey on the sidelines, and he goes, there's too much time. Because I had some good friends on defense, but we weren't very good defensively at that was time.
Not the strength.
Yeah. And sure enough, they drove right down, and Mark Mosley missed, I believe, like a 37-yarder that they would have beat us 50-48. Mm-hmm. And, but, and until the Chiefs Rams a couple years ago, I think it ended up like 54-52, but mm-hmm. It was the highest scoring Monday night game in NFL history.
Which maybe we need to put an asterisk next to that one, because they can't play defense anymore. So, maybe we need to do that. Offenses can run rampant now. So you mentioned that was your first year you went to the Pro Bowl. What was the Pro Bowl like back in the 80s? I mean, compared to today, it's a very different game.
Well, the winners got 10,000 and the losers got 5. And of course, if you brought your wife with you, she already had the other 5 spent. So people were playing their butts off to get that extra 5 grand. I mean, it was a real game, and
It's
it
a
was
big
over in
moment.
Hawaii. Uh, we stayed at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, and I mean, every day after practice, you were just sitting around having beers with, the guys from the Jets, the guys from the Oilers, the guys from the Cowboys, and you know, all these, superstars from around the league. I remember Larry McCarron, our center, and I were sitting in our lockers over in Hawaii, and we're looking around. He goes, "Look, there's Randy White from the Cowboys." I'm like, "Oh man, yeah, look, and there's Walter Payton over there." And Larry and I look at each other and go, "Yeah, but we're here." Woo!
That's
So
great.
we
Very good
were we
time,
were
man.
like little kids in a candy store.
That's awesome. That's very different how the game is today compared to then. Um, the other game that came to mind when you graciously agreed to come on was the 1985 Snow Bowl, which still has to be one of the oddest games in Packers history. So a blizzard rolls into Green Bay, 20,000 fans show up and 30,000 plus can't make it. What is
Yeah,
that moment like for you coming from Kansas, where I know it gets cold there and I know you guys get some
yeah.
snow, but to get a blizzard of 15 inches and the field looked miserable, not miserable, but that looked like a mess all around.
I actually have a there was a I I tell my wife I was actually a centerfold at one time because in the center of Sports Illustrated there's a picture and I have it on my phone and it's our huddle. Lynn Dickey's, it's from behind Lynn, and we're in a circle and Lynn squatted down calling the play and I'm right across from him, and then our linemen and everything, and you can see all the snow and everything, and the caption up in the corner is fourth quarter, fourth down, 4 below. How does it feel? Sports Illustrated. Get the picture.
Wow. Yeah.
And I have that on my phone. So when people ask, well, what's the coldest game? I pull it out and show them. And yeah, I mean, 41 highway and 43 were both snowed in. We got probably 18 inches, before, and then we got another 10, I think, during the game, and even got some after. But I tell everybody it brings people down to my speed. So I had an advantage. And as a receiver, where you're going.
Yeah.
The defender doesn't. So you can kind of play into that and think, okay, if he makes a hard cut, he's going to slip. So I know where I'm going. And, Lynn, we actually played one in Denver that was almost as bad. I think it was a Monday night game. And, Elway was horrible. And Lynn, threw for over 300 yards, which he probably did in that Tampa game too. But he could throw the ball when it was wet and snowy, and we had a good game plan, and it was a fun game.
I do feel bad for the quarterbacks in those games, especially the Tampa side, with Tampa deciding to wear white for some like the all whites. I
Yeah,
don't know how. I mean, Steve Young had a horrendous game. I don't know how he could see anyone. And then Lynn on the other side, how do you see a defender in an all white uniform in a blizzard? I mean, at least he knows where his receivers are. But what a miserable game for quarterbacks in that. Uh, hey, it's Ben again. Sorry to jump in. I wanted to give you this week's word of the week for the giveaway. Before I do, I want to say thank you once again to Nicolay Law for making these giveaways possible all year long. If you are injured, get Nicolay. This week's word of the week is 2007. So it's the year 2007, 2007, which not only was that the year I graduated high school, which makes me feel like a dinosaur just saying that, almost 20 years already. That's wild. But it is also the year that Nicolay Law opened their very first office, which was located in Hudson, Wisconsin. So if you are new here, if you don't know what to do with that, find the link in the comments below or the show notes, fill out that giveaway link, and put in 2007 as the Nicolay Law word of the week to enter for your chance to win some great Packers memorabilia during next week's episode. Once again, thank you to all of you for supporting, and thanks to Nicolay Law for backing the show. Let's get back to our conversation with Paul. So as you're in the huddle, I mean, are you looking around and seeing how empty it is compared to what it usually was, or are you just kind of focused on the task at hand and not really reflecting?
I mean, you got to be focused on your job. I mean, pro football's tough enough the way it is, and then you start bringing the elements into it, and just the focus has to be that much more. And the good thing is when you get over to the sideline, they got the space heaters going, they got capes. I mean, you can take your big cape and open it up, get the heat, and then kind of wrap yourself up, thaw your toes and your hands out a little bit before you go back out there. But that was a fun game. It really was.
So as you reflect over I believe it's 157 games that you played over your 11-year career, what are some of your favorites? Whether it's from an individual statistic wise or just an overall favorite game that you got the opportunity to play?
Well, obviously the first game I ever played in, it's like I made it, and again, growing up in Chase, Kansas, having to walk on at Kansas State, winning one game my junior year and one game my senior year, then getting an opportunity in Green Bay. They actually had 5 tight ends in camp my rookie year, and my name was number 5 on the depth chart. So the starter, Rich McGeorge, would get 2 or 3 reps. They drafted a guy out of Washington named Eason Ramson, and he was slotted number 2, so he would get 2 or 3 reps during team period. They had a guy named Don Peterson that had been in the Jets camp the year before. He got 2 reps, and a guy named Billy Dixon that was number 4, and he got 2 reps. Well, they'd get down to me, I'd had 1 rep. And they had a dry erase board that they would write the play on and hold it up, during 2-a-days, so everybody behind the huddle could see what the play is. And again, I could learn. I knew what to do on every play. And I remember some of those other tight ends. I mean, Rich McGeorge obviously had been there. He knew what to do on every play. But those other guys would get in the huddle, and they'd write that play up. The quarterback would call it, and you could tell that they didn't know what to do. And they would look at me like, what do I do on this play? And I'd go, oh man, I don't know. And they'd get out there and screw up the play. And our tight end coach, Lou Carpenter, he actually, at the time, you didn't have a tight end coach. He was just receivers. He'd go, give me a effing tight end that knows what to do. And I'd jump in there and run the play. And I'd get back and they'd go, I thought you said you didn't know. I said, man, it just came to me all of a sudden.
Did they issue 82 right off the bat?
94. 94. Wow. And again, I was too naive to realize that they weren't planning on keeping a tight end. They gave number 94. I remember calling up my parents going, man, I'm number 94. If you ever get a Packer game or anything, look for me. I'm number 94. And I actually, after I made the team, I wore 81 in college. And Rich McGeorge, who, he'd been there for 8-9 years, whatever, he had 81. And after I made the team, I remember going to him and say, "Hey, Rich, I wore 81 in college. You mind if I take 81?" He looks at me and he goes, "Are you effing kidding me?" He goes, "No, I'm not going to give you my number." So once I made the team, they gave me number 82.
Fantastic. Yeah, you see that in camp today when you go to Packers training camp. You're like, that's not a good number for that guy. The odds aren't looking good. He's not gonna stick around long if he's gonna be
Yeah,
wearing that number. So I'm glad you got
yeah,
reissued 82, and still, uh, I mean, Lionel Aldridge did really well in 82, but
yeah.
still, arguably the best 82 in my opinion
Well,
is the one talking to me right now.
Don Beebe was pretty good too when he wore it.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Short lived, but short lived for Don here in Green Bay. But I think you're the best to don it, and not just
Thank
saying
you.
that because you're standing in front of me.
Yeah, I
So
always, uh, I always tease. Um, yeah, you said Lionel Aldridge, and I got that in my head. Marv Fleming. I always tease Marv Fleming, like when he's still alive, and I think he had the most Super Bowl rings, until Brady beat him or Charles Haley or somebody like that. But when I see Marv, I always say, Marv. I understand you're the second best tight end that ever played in Green Bay. He goes, "Yeah, but I got more Super Bowl rings."
hey, it's not your fault that the defense couldn't do anything in the early 80s.
Yeah,
If you had
again,
Lombardi's defense, I think you'd be winning some rings as well.
right place, right time.
Yep, exactly. So in 1994, after your career's wrapped up, the Packers induct you into the Hall of Fame, into their team Hall of Fame. What is that moment like for you? Did they give you a phone call to let you know it was going to happen, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, I mean, they call you, and I can't remember exactly who called, but again, it's just kind of a culmination of the end.
Mhm.
This is you've done all you can do. You've been honored for it, and just thank you. And to me, it was kind of just signaling the end. Obviously, my last year I played in Minnesota with the Vikings, and when I left Green Bay, Forrest Gregg was the coach, and the whole attitude had changed.
Mhm.
Um, there's a proverb in the Bible. It says the power of life and death are in the tongue. You can encourage people with your words, or you can discourage people. Bart was an encourager. Some people would say, well, Bart wasn't tough enough. Bart was tough. I mean, but he wasn't an MF guy. He wasn't,
Mhm.
going to cuss you and berate you and insult you and threaten you. And he would do things like saying, "You're better than that. I expect more out of you than that." Actually, my second year, um, I came back. I was weighing 228 pounds. I was having a hell of a camp. I was catching everything. I was blocking so well. I mean, I actually could squat, like parallel squat, 600 pounds. I had strong
Wow.
legs.
Wow.
And so I was blocking, I was catching, and I'm sitting in meeting during training camp. And over the loudspeaker, it says, Coach Starr wants to see Paul Coffman in his office. And I'm thinking, man, I've done everything I can to try to make this team. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to go back to school? Of course, my rookie year, I didn't catch a pass. So it wasn't like somebody else was going to pick me up. I'm just contemplating my future. And I walk into Coach Starr's office and he said, "Have a seat, young man." I sat down. I'm kind of looking down at my feet. I got my playbook with me. He goes and sits behind his desk and he said, "I want you to be the first to know that this morning I released our starting tight end, Rich McGeorge." He goes, "The way you work and the way you prepared, you have earned the right to be the starting tight end for the Green Bay Packers." I mean, tears are just coming down my eyes, and I'm like,
Wow.
Coach Starr, I will not let you down. I will do everything in my power to prove that you have made the right decision. And, for him to speak those words to me, Forrest came in and, one of his first speeches was, I'm not going to be 8-8 around here anymore. He said, I'm searching the waiver wire to replace you guys every day. And I was like, I mean, that's how you introduce yourself to our team. But just the whole dynamic had changed. And, again, you know, I know fear and intimidation can be motivators, but when you hear it every day, it just gets old.
Yep.
Goes in one ear and out the other, and it just has no meaning or value. And he would threaten people, and they would still be there, and they would still be underperforming. And I'm going, well, if you're going to threaten, follow through. Cut them.
Mhm.
Bring somebody else. And it was just you know not a good situation. And when the Packers released me, I thought, hey, I'm from Kansas City. I actually lived in Kansas City in the off season, and I actually worked out at Arrowhead Stadium with my buddies who played for the Chiefs. So I called them up and said, hey, I'd like to play here. And at the time, their tight ends weren't catching many passes, and I thought, well, this would be a great opportunity. Well, then when I got down there, I found out why they weren't catching any passes. They didn't throw them any passes. So, but it was good to kind of come home and play 2 years with the Chiefs. And then my last year, I was really done. I didn't have the 1988. I didn't have the eye of the tiger. I was married, uh, had one child, one on the way. Um, God was in football wasn't God. Came to
Mhm.
that realization, and I mean, just football wasn't everything to me anymore. And I hanging out our court Minnesota said that he got a tight end hurt in camp, and he said it's the same terminology we had in Green Bay. I need a backup. Steve Jordan was the starter. Mike Mularkey was number two, and he just needs somebody there for insurance. And it was a good way to transition the game and to be involved in it, but just to know that okay, this is my last year, and then I'm gonna go on and to the important stuff, being a husband and a father, and a positive influence in my community. So but then to be inducted into the Packer Hall of Fame again, just kind of put the cherry on top. That hey, you did it. You did everything you could, and people realize that.
Well, and you're still a fan favorite today among many that watched you play. So I think that says something to your dedication to the game, how you've always treated others. So I think that's something you can always hang your hat on as well.
Yeah, I in June I was in Wisconsin for 17 days doing fundraisers, golf tournaments, speaking engagements. Obviously the Packer fans. My kids have traveled overseas. I had a son that played arena football, and he played a game in Japan, and he sent
Wow.
me a picture of somebody over in Japan with a Packer jersey on, saying, Packer fans, they're everywhere. My daughter did a mission trip to Zimbabwe and sent me a picture of a native in a village that had a Packer jersey on. And
Wow.
I mean, Packer fans are everywhere, and obviously the Packers fans love, and the state of Wisconsin loves their Packers, and they gave so much to us. I tell people when I was in Green Bay, I never played in any Super Bowls, but I never played in front of a crowd that wasn't sold out. Even
Hmm.
that snow game was sold out. It's just people couldn't make it. And they have an unconditional love for their team. And, if I can come up and be a part of a fundraiser and tell some stories, and some of them are actually true. That yeah, why not? It's fun coming back up there for the different fundraisers.
Absolutely. And then in 2009, your son Chase was drafted in the third round by the Bengals. What
Yeah,
what was that experience, or what was that moment like with him, and knowing how different your own path to the league had been?
yeah. Well, I said I was in the right place at the right time. I think he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He he was the Mackey Award winner coming out of college, and actually, when he left college, he was the all-time leading receiving tight end in NCAA history.
Wow.
And but he never put his hand on the ground. You think of a tight end as somebody that puts their hand on the ground and blocks, but he was a 6'6" mismatch. They would put him in motion, move him out wide. If a linebacker went out with him, he was usually more athletic. If a DB covered him, he was just bigger and would go down and body up like a center in basketball.
Hmm.
And I mean, he was a pass catching machine. And he went to the Bengals, and they immediately tried to make him an inline blocker. His coach was a tight end that I played with in Kansas City, Jonathan Hayes, that played 11, 12 years and maybe caught 100 passes, and kept trying to make him an inline blocker, which he'd never done. And so he spent a couple years there, and then he backed up Tony Gonzalez down in Atlanta for a couple years. He backed up Jimmy Graham up in Seattle, and Delaney Walker for the Titans. So he got 8 years in the league, but I just felt like he wasn't in the right place at the right time. I think coaches need to put players in position to succeed, and I believe the Packers put me in position to succeed.
Hmm. Sure, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, well, perfect. Any stories that you want to share that you felt we missed here, or anything that not trying to get anyone in trouble or anything like that, but
Yeah. Well, people say, well, what are you most proud of? I say, well, my wife and I are actually coming up in May on our 40th anniversary. I say I'm most proud of the fact I've been married to the same woman for 40 years. I got 4 kids that all played Division I college sports. My son Carson played quarterback at Kansas State and then played arena football for a few years. He came out 2011 when they had the strike and didn't get a tryout. My daughter Camille played volleyball at the University of Wyoming,
wow.
and my youngest son Cameron played at the University of Indiana and then transferred to Wyoming. Actually played in front of Josh Allen, but he would say, "Dad, it's just a matter of time." He goes, "The guy's 6'4", 6'4", 225. He can throw the ball 80 yards, and so the problem is he throws the 15-yard comeback like he would throw an 80-yard bomb. He said when he figures it out, I'm going to be on the bench. But
Well, if you're gonna lose your job to anyone, Josh Allen's a
yeah,
pretty good person to lose it to.
yeah. But there is one story. My wife loves me to tell this one. Probably third, fourth year in the league, and I'm starting to get some notoriety, some votes for Pro Bowl, and we're getting ready to play the Houston Oilers. That's not the Houston Texans.
Yeah.
The Houston Oilers, and they had an outside linebacker by the name of Robert Brazil. And Robert, kind of like Lawrence Taylor, just one of the biggest, meanest guys. Actually, Robert got inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame a couple years ago. And I'm pumped. It's like, man, I'm going to showcase my skills against Robert Brazil. And Robert's one of these guys that talks the whole game, talks about your mama, talks about your girlfriend. He tries to get in your head and get your concentration off what you're supposed to do and into that personal battle with him. And on one play, I fire out on Robert. I got my head in his chest. I got my fist up in his gut, knocked him over, pancaked him. He might have tripped over somebody, but I did pancake him, and I was on top of him. Well, all of a sudden he jumps up and his fists are clenched. I kind of braced myself, thinking, if he hits me, then he'll get the 15-yard penalty. All of a sudden he steps back and he goes, "Coffman," he said, "the coaches warned me, told me you'd be firing out on me." He goes, "You're a good ball player, Coffman." I'm thinking, Robert Brazil thinks I'm a good ball player. I wanted to go back to the huddle, tell the rest of the guys, hey, guess what Robert said about me? My head swelled up, my helmet got a little tight. Well, the very, very next play was a little pass where I move off the line of scrimmage and I go in motion behind our line. And they hike the ball about the time I get behind one of our big tackles. And it's called a delay route. And I'll just kind of set behind the tackle and count 1,001, 1,002, wait for the linebackers to split. And there's usually a hole right there in the middle, again, a little 8-yard hook route. And boy, it just works all the time. So I go in motion, they hike the ball, 1,001, 1,002. I see the linebacker split. I run my little hook route over the middle. What I don't see is their strong safety, Vernon Perry, has me man-to-man. I catch the ball. I take one step upfield. Vernon comes right across my face mask with his forearm. My feet go up in the air. My helmet comes off. Back of my head hits the ground, and it dazes me. And I'm laying on the ground. I got my eyes closed. I finally open my eyes, and old Robert Brazil standing over me, and he goes, Vernon's a good ball player too. So on any given play, you can get humbled and find out that no matter how good you think you are, there's always somebody better.
And that is the one and only Paul Coffman. I cannot even begin to thank Paul enough for taking the time to come on the show and share his story. It was so great getting a chance to talk with him and hear some of his great stories that he has. It was honestly still on cloud 9 over it. I also want to say thank you to Nicolay Law for sponsoring the show all year long and their support that they give. Thank you to all of you for taking the time to listen and the support you guys give. Without you guys, it wouldn't be possible. So thank you so much. If you want to be on an episode of Tales from the Tundra, check the show notes or the comments for the form to submit for your chance to come on the show and share your story. As always, my name is Ben. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you same place, same time next week. Until then, go Pack Go.